Let's dive straight into the core of Descartes' later work. We're looking at how he saw the body not just as a vessel, but as fundamentally crucial for knowing the world. His idea is that our bodily sensations are like the first line of defense, or maybe the first handshake, in establishing a reliable connection between us and the physical world. This isn't just about feeling hot or cold, it's about building the very foundation for genuine scientific understanding. Think of it as the body's information system being the gateway to knowledge. And here's a neat twist. While this information system, how we sense, and the maintenance system, keeping the body running, are deeply linked, Descartes argued they can be judged for their health independently. You can assess if your senses are trustworthy without necessarily judging whether your body's overall upkeep is perfect, and vice versa. This avoids getting stuck in circular reasoning when trying to figure out what constitutes a truly healthy, epistemologically sound body. So, Descartes wasn't just tinkering with metaphysics and epistemology, he had this grand vision extending beyond mere physical health. Richard Rorty nails it. Descartes wanted to expand medical health to moral soundness. It's like saying, if we can get our bodies right, maybe we can get our ethics right too. He saw virtues like self-respect and what he called générosité. Think of it as a kind of intellectual and emotional generosity and open-mindedness as key. The idea is that these aren't just nice feelings, they're reliable guides, especially because, for Descartes, nature itself, as interpreted through reason, is ultimately benevolent. So, following these natural inclinations, refined by reason, leads us towards the good. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't some rigid mathematical code for ethics. Metaphysics, as he conceived it, doesn't give us a final judge to settle every moral dispute, especially tricky ones where cutting-edge science might clash with community values. But, and this is crucial, it does offer a plausible path, a realistic grounding for ethics. This shows that his whole ambitious project wasn't just hot air. It aimed to build a practical, unified system that could genuinely help humanity live better lives. Let's zoom in on that quote. This is Descartes laying out his mission statement, his North Star. He starts with a noble goal, doing all in our power for the general welfare of mankind. Sounds familiar, right? Then comes the punchline. How do we achieve this? Through knowledge. Not just any knowledge, but knowledge of great utility for life, something practical, useful. He envisions a complete overhaul of philosophy, ditching the abstract speculations of the schools for something grounded in understanding the real world. Fire, water, air, stars, everything. The ultimate aim, to become lords and masters of nature. Ooh, sounds a bit arrogant, maybe even dangerous from our modern perspective, doesn't it? But remember the context. This was about escaping poverty, disease, and ignorance. The primary benefit he highlights is health, the chief good, the bedrock upon which all other goods rest. It's a powerful blend of scientific ambition and humanistic concern. Okay, so Descartes had this incredible vision, but the world didn't exactly roll out the red carpet. As soon as he passed away, the critics descended like vultures. Voltaire, ever the sharp wit, nailed the caricature of Cartesian rationalism, the image of someone sitting in a room, grinding gears in their head, detached from reality. Theologically, it was a minefield. Both Protestants and Catholics had issues, though for different reasons. A big sticking point was transubstantiation, how the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ. Descartes tried to argue against it using his physics, but people felt he was undermining a core doctrine. Even groups you might expect to support him, like the Jesuits initially, or even sympathetic figures within rival factions like the Jansenists, couldn't fully embrace him. Interestingly, while theology railed against him, science was buzzing with Cartesian ideas. Occasionalism, the idea that God directly intervenes to make causation work, popped up thanks partly to Descartes, paving the way for later thinkers like Hume. But there were strong philosophical pushbacks too. Thinkers like Hobbes and Gassendi, who famously wrote objections to the Meditations, weren't convinced. And then there was Pierre Daniel Huet, whose scathing critique really shaped how people viewed Cartesianism in the late 17th century. Despite the heat, Descartes' influence was undeniable. Giants like Spinoza, Locke, and Leibniz all wrestled with his ideas, often criticizing them but inevitably building on the structures he laid down. Think of them as taking his blueprint and either renovating it or building entirely new houses based on its foundations. Fast forward to today, and our entire worldview, our conception of what philosophy even is, has evolved in ways Descartes couldn't have imagined. Yet, there's still plenty he'd recognize, aspects of his program that feel remarkably successful. The key takeaway: the sheer breadth and fertility of Cartesian thought. It wasn't just one narrow idea, it touched almost every corner of philosophy. Descartes himself knew his project was massive, calling it infinite, beyond the power of a single person. Understanding his legacy, then, isn't just about studying one philosopher. It's about grasping the tangled, fascinating history of how we got to the modern age. It's a rewarding, if challenging, task. All right, let's rewind the clock and look at Descartes' early life. That famous winter retreat in 1619 to 20, where he supposedly had those revelatory dreams, wasn't the start of his philosophical journey, but rather a turning point. He decided then to use his mind to choose his path, but he put it off. He waited until he was older than 23 before really diving in. This period of travel and reflection, lasting 9 years, came first. And here's a fun fact. Much of what we thought we knew about his early years, thanks to his biographer Bea, is actually wrong. Bayet made some wild guesses about Descartes' family background, making them sound richer and more noble than they were. Details like his birth, when his mother died, when he went to school, even who his teachers were, these got muddled up. It's like trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces from different boxes. Getting the timeline and facts straight is crucial for understanding how he actually developed. So, what was life like for young René at La Flèche? Bela paints a picture of equal treatment, which Descartes later praised. But there were perks for the nobles, like private rooms and valets, though Baye excuses this for Descartes' fragile health. What stands out is the sheer amount of free time he had. Apparently, he devoured books on obscure subjects, anything that caught his eye. He did have health issues, a lung condition that plagued him for years, maybe tuberculosis. This led to him staying in bed late, a habit he kept for life. Interestingly, despite the Jesuit promise of clear and certain knowledge, Descartes felt disappointed. He craved certainty, the ability to distinguish true from false, to navigate life confidently. It wasn't just about academic knowledge. It was about practical wisdom, about achieving glory, not just honor or riches through a conventional career. This hints at the deeper dissatisfaction that would drive his later quest. What really fired Descartes up at La Flèche? Two main things. First, this ideal of générosité, a kind of chivalric spirit inspired by heroes and poetry. He loved inspiration over rigid rules. There's even a tantalizing possibility he wrote a sonnet celebrating Galileo's discoveries around the time of Henry IV's death anniversary. Second, mathematics, especially algebraic geometry, the pure abstract kind, detached from immediate applications. His early work on music theory, Compendium Musicae, was all about mathematical ratios. He even contrasted himself with Beekman, who was into practical stuff like mechanics and hydraulics. Later, he'd praise technical skills, but initially he seemed drawn to the elegance of pure math. On the flip side, he rejected the applied crafts, finding little exalted built on such firm foundations. Morally, he leaned away from Stoicism, disliking their emphasis on emotional control or pride. He also kept a clear line between reason and faith early on, a distinction he maintained throughout his life. As for law and medicine, mentioned by his father, he probably studied them later, focusing on anatomy much later, avoiding the Rosicrucian rumors. After La Flèche, Descartes briefly dabbled in military life, serving under Prince Maurice of Nassau. Bela tries to spin this as a study of customs, but it seems more like a youthful adventure, perhaps fueled by that initial enthusiasm for arms. Then in November 1618, fate steps in. He bumps into Isaac Beekman. This meeting is pivotal. Beekman, a brilliant mathematician and natural philosopher, basically pulls Descartes back from the brink of idleness and gets him thinking seriously again. Around this time, Descartes starts keeping a notebook, the Register, where he begins jotting down scientific thoughts. He titles it Preambula Preliminaries and adds a motto: "The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom." It's like he's stepping onto the stage of the learned world, masked as a soldier. This notebook includes observations, especially on emotions, and crucially references his famous dreams from the following winter. These early interactions and writings set the stage for his intellectual awakening. Now, let's talk about that legendary winter of 1619-20. Descartes is supposedly at the emperor's coronation, finds a quiet spot and gets serious. He'd promised Beekman he'd finish a mechanics and geometry project. What happens next is fascinating. He's working on expressing equations using curves, a huge task, feeling like he's found a light to illuminate the darkness of the subject. This is the backdrop to his dreams. Baylet's account is colorful but probably inaccurate, talking about fire in the brain and visions. The reality, as reconstructed from fragments, seems more mundane but profound. He has nightmares, encounters a stranger offering a melon, maybe symbolizing the cosmos, faces temptations, feels attacked by an evil spirit, wakes up in pain. Then, in a calmer dream, books appear and disappear. An encyclopedia representing interconnected knowledge, then replaced by Ausonius's poem asking, "What road in life shall I follow?" This, combined with the earlier glimpse of unifying sciences via mathesis, points directly to the path he chose: a systematic search for truth, linking all knowledge. Following those dreams, Descartes makes promises. By September 1620, he vows to finish a treatise and visit Loreto. What was this treatise? Probably related to algebra, maybe precursors to his geometry work. This period also marks the beginning of his Regulae ad Directionem Ingenii, the rules for the direction of our native intelligence. This is where he starts sketching out his grand plan, to investigate every truth accessible to human reason. Notice the echoes of his earlier vision, unifying the sciences, using good sense as the starting point. He even defines wisdom as strictly human here, not divine. Alongside this, he writes a lost treatise on fencing, maybe reflecting his earlier martial interest. And he travels extensively in Italy from 1623 to 1625, soaking up experiences, though sadly, no meeting with Galileo. He even saw an avalanche on his way back. These experiences, combined with his growing philosophical framework, were shaping him. Back in France after Italy, Descartes hits the ground running. He quickly becomes known, likely through connections like Marin Mersenne, the hub of scientific discussion. He admired Francis Bacon's method, listing qualities derived from him. He even touched on Gilbert's work on magnetism, and intriguingly, Beekman testifies that Descartes had already figured out the law of refraction independently of Snell. Then, around 1628, he meets Cardinal Berulle. This encounter is significant. The cardinal basically tells Descartes, "You need to dedicate your life to philosophy, find something more certain than what's out there." This pushes Descartes towards his radical project, questioning even the bedrock of mathematics, eventually subordinating it to God. Perhaps hearing Nassau's reported last words, "I believe 2 and 2 make 4, reinforced the need to ground even basic truths. By 1628, he's planning to write specifically on God, a project he shares with the Oratorian priest Gibeuf. To focus, Descartes moves to Holland. First stop Franeker, a remote university town. He enrolls as a philosopher, bringing just the Bible and Aquinas initially. Why there? Solitude and access to books. He starts working on that planned treatise on God. But then, a twist. He hears about observations of Parhelia's sundogs. This sparks a shift. He realizes that proving the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, while important, isn't enough for physics. The fundamental distinction between thinking substance and extended matter is sufficient for the foundations of physics. So, he moves to Amsterdam, seeking more interaction with the learned community and richer empirical data, sailors' tales, etc. He dives into meteorology, rainbow colors, even plans a fable about a new world arising from chaos. Crucially, he intends to include physiology, explaining the human body as a machine governed by the same laws derived from God's perfections. This is the blueprint for Le Monde. This Le Monde, or world, was ambitious. To make it work scientifically, Descartes needed to tackle some deep metaphysical questions. How does movement work in a plenum, a space completely full of matter? He posits continuous divine action, mathematical laws created alongside intellectual beings, inertia, and vortices generating elements. But then, news arrives. Galileo's dialogue on the two chief world systems has been banned in Rome. Descartes, wanting to avoid controversy, postpones publishing his own work, even though he knows the ban is unjustified scientifically. Instead, he decides to publish a discourse on method first, acting as a preface to his larger work. He outlines the contents of Le Monde, throws in a sample finding like blood circulation, hoping to generate buzz and maybe even pressure the authorities. He already has 3 essays ready: optics, meteorology, and geometry, showcasing the power of his method. The discourse gets published in 1637. It's written near Utrecht, presented as a preface, almost like an intellectual autobiography. It highlights his method, the proofs for God, and the mind-body distinction, though he admits the metaphysical part was rushed. It's published anonymously in Leiden. Readers like Vacher and Pollitt start asking tough questions. This prompts Descartes to write the Meditations, aiming to clarify and complete his early metaphysics. He circulates the Latin text first, gathering objections. The responses are legendary: Caterus, Mersenne collecting others, Hobbes, Arnauld, whose objections Descartes really appreciated, Gassendi, whose O flesh reply shows the tension, and unnamed geometers. For the second edition, he adds objections from Bourdon, a Jesuit, and removes the Sorbonne approval he never got. Things get heated, especially with the Utrecht quarrel sparked by his disciple Regius misrepresenting his views. Descartes fires back, defending himself against accusations of atheism and papism. It's a complex web of intellectual sparring. Finally, in 1644, the Principles of Philosophy sees the light of day in Amsterdam, followed by a French translation in 1647. Descartes continues to engage with critics, defending his ideas right up to the end. His journey, from those early doubts and dreams to the controversies surrounding his major works, represents a monumental effort to reshape philosophy and science. His legacy, despite the criticisms and the complexities, remains central to understanding the birth of modern thought.